There are people who destroy us slowly, not with fists or shouting, but with silence, charm, and persuasion. They can sit beside you, speak kindly, and still drain your spirit. Sometimes you walk away from them and feel smaller, confused, tired. You can't quite explain what happened, only that something in you has shifted, and not in a good way. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden, unconscious part of our psyche that holds all we deny, repress, or refuse to see. And while we all have a shadow, the danger lies in those who are completely possessed by it, yet pretend to be guided by light. These people aren't monsters in the dark. They're your co-workers, your lovers, your friends, your leaders. Jung warned, the more unconscious the shadow, the more power it has over us and over others. This video isn't about judgment. It's not a list of villains. It's a map, a mirror. A quiet warning for those willing to look beneath the surface of human behavior, including their own. Today, we'll explore 6 types of dangerous people that Carl Jung's teachings help us identify. Not because they're evil, but because they're trapped in unconscious patterns that harm everyone around them. But here's the twist. The point isn't just to avoid them. The point is to make sure we don't become them. Each type you'll hear about today might sound like someone you know, but if you listen closely, you may also hear an echo of yourself. That's not a threat, it's a gift. Because everything unconscious can become conscious, and everything conscious can be transformed. So let's begin, not with fear, but with clarity. Because the most dangerous people are often those who believe they're only doing good. To understand dangerous people, we first need to understand the unconscious and how it shapes the human psyche. Carl Jung believed that every person carries within them a hidden side, the shadow. It's not evil in itself. In fact, it contains everything we've repressed: desires, fears, instincts, traumas, memories, and impulses we've learned to hide. Society taught us to behave, to be good, to be acceptable. But the parts of us that didn't fit those standards didn't disappear. They were buried in the shadow. Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. The most dangerous people are not those who have a shadow, but those who refuse to admit they do. Because what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. We judge, attack, manipulate, control. Not because we are strong, but because we are afraid of what we cannot face within ourselves. And so, the shadow takes over." Jung described several ways this happens. Projection, when a person sees their own flaws in everyone else, but never in themselves. Moralism, when someone hides their dark urges behind a mask of righteousness and judgment. Control and domination, when someone feels powerless inside and compensates by trying to dominate the outer world. Addiction to power, when a person becomes obsessed with superiority as a way to avoid confronting their own insecurity. The shadow isn't inherently negative. It also holds creativity, intuition, sexuality, strength, and raw potential. But when it remains unconscious, it turns toxic. And that's when people become dangerous. Jung believed that what we don't make conscious will control our lives, and we will call it fate. And in his clinical practice, he saw that the greatest damage done by people was almost always unintentional. It came from blindness, from unconscious patterns repeating themselves generation after generation. He once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." This is why Jung's work was not about diagnosing others, but about waking up to the deeper truths within ourselves. He didn't ask, "How do we defeat dangerous people?" He asked, "How do we integrate what we fear so we don't become what we hate?" And that's where the 6 dangerous archetypes come in. Each one represents a specific distortion of the shadow. Each one is someone who has become fused with an aspect of themselves they refuse to face, and who acts it out on others. But here's the paradox. These people rarely seem dangerous at first glance. They're often charming, intelligent, persuasive, and even helpful. That's what makes them so hard to spot. Jung believed that the real threat to humanity wasn't evil. It was unconsciousness. It's the neighbor who smiles while manipulating, the partner who loves while controlling, the leader who speaks of morality while hiding corruption. They don't see themselves as villains. They often believe they are righteous, and so they justify every action, no matter how destructive, with stories of virtue. As Jung put it, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. So, how do we protect ourselves? First, by learning to see, not just with the eyes, but with intuition, emotion, and psychological awareness. Second, by knowing the types. Because while each person is unique, certain patterns repeat. And once you recognize the archetype, you can begin to protect your boundary. And third, by doing your own shadow work. Because nothing attracts manipulation more than unhealed wound, and nothing repels toxicity more than self-awareness. In the next chapter, we'll dive deep into the 6 dangerous types, not to label people, but to illuminate patterns, to bring what's hidden into the light. Because once you name the shadow, it loses power. They don't look dangerous at first. In fact, many of them seem thoughtful, charming, even vulnerable. But beneath the surface, a different story unfolds. One of manipulation, projection, moral rigidity, and chaos. According to Jung, these people are not evil in a traditional sense. They are what happens when the unconscious mind is left unchecked. When the shadow, all those hidden urges, fears, and unresolved traumas, takes over a person's identity. The damage is done not with violence, but with invisibility. You might know this person. They never raise their voice. They never argue, but somehow they always get what they want. They're the ones who make you feel responsible for their feeling, who twist your words into guilt, who smile while pulling string. This is emotional control disguised as care. They don't say, "You must." They say, "If you loved me, you would." At first, it seems harmless, even loving. But over time, your sense of self begins to erode. You start to question your thoughts, your memory, your reality. That's not an accident. It's gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation that leaves you confused, submissive, and dependent. Jung saw this pattern as a defense mechanism rooted in fear. People who couldn't assert themselves as children often learn to manipulate as adults. It becomes a way to survive, and then a way to dominate. Then there are those who always see the worst in others. They accuse, criticize, and condemn, not because of what you've done, but because of what they refuse to see in themselves. Jung called this projection, the unconscious transfer of one's own flaws onto others. The person who constantly accuses others of being selfish is often the one unwilling to face their own unmet need. The person who sees enemies everywhere is usually at war within. These individuals are dangerous, not because they lie, but because they genuinely believe the lie. They are trapped in a psychological mirror, where every judgment they make is aimed not at you, but at a part of themselves they have disowned. And yet, you become the scapegoat. You carry their pain, while they carry none of their own. But projection can wear a robe of virtue. Some people, Jung warned, become moral tyrants, obsessed with what's right or pure, while remaining blind to the darkness behind their own righteousness. These people speak of ethics, justice, order, but what they really want is control. They aren't interested in truth, but in obedience. They elevate rules above compassion and judge others to avoid judging themselves. This is not true morality. It is fear wearing a halo. It is a refusal to acknowledge that even the most upright person carries darkness within. And when you live under the gaze of such a person, you stop expressing. You start censoring yourself. You shrink, because their approval becomes more important than your authenticity. On the opposite end of the spectrum, some people seem fragile, helpless, endlessly wounded. They don't yell or control, they suffer, and they make their suffering your responsibility. Jung understood this behavior not just as weakness, but as manipulation. The person who always plays the victim often harbors a deep, hidden anger, but instead of expressing it, they trap others in a cycle of guilt and rescue. They drain your energy while convincing you that you're the only one who can save them. But no matter what you do, it's never enough, because their identity is built on being wrong. Growth would mean letting go of the story, and they can't afford that. They punish others with their pain, and reward them with brief moments of emotional relief that feel like love. But it isn't love, it's dependence. Some people don't manipulate through guilt or morality, they simply bring chaos without knowing why. These are the individuals who seem to sabotage every space they enter. Relationships unravel, jobs implode, friendships fall apart, and always it's someone else's fault. They don't realize that the storm around them is a reflection of the storm within. Jung believed that what we repress eventually finds its way into the world, often destructively. The chaos bringer is someone who has not faced their own emotional turmoil, and so they unconsciously create it externally. Their life is a loop of crisis and collapse, and if you get close, you'll be pulled into it too. You'll think you can help. You'll try to offer stability, but chaos doesn't want peace. It wants to be felt, seen, and repeated. And then, there are the rare few who have become their shadow completely. These people are no longer fighting their inner demons. They've made peace with them. They've turned their inner darkness into a tool for dominance. Unlike the others, they don't hide behind guilt, pain, or morality. They operate with full awareness of the power they hold, and they use it without remorse. They are often charismatic, visionary, even inspirational on the surface. They can be leaders, teachers, lovers. But once you're inside their orbit, you start to feel the distortion. Everything serves them. Disagreement becomes betrayal. Doubt becomes threat. They isolate, seduce, and destroy, not in a fit of rage, but with surgical precision. Jung called this inflation, when the ego expands to godlike proportions and no longer recognizes any limit. The person possessed by the shadow no longer sees themselves as human, and they stop treating others as such. What unites all these types is not malice, it is blindness, a refusal or inability to face what lies within. Each one is acting out a pattern that began long ago, maybe in childhood, maybe through trauma, maybe through cultural or familial programming. But whatever its source, it has grown in the dark, and now it moves through them. The manipulator fears vulnerability and seeks control. The projector hides shame and sees enemies. The moralist fears inner chaos and demands outer purity. The victim vampire fears abandonment and creates dependency. The chaos bringer fears stillness and births destruction. And the shadow possessed? They fear nothing. And that's the danger. But these people don't just live out there, in others. Sometimes, if we're honest, we find pieces of them in ourselves. And that's not a reason for shame. It's an invitation to awaken. Jung never taught us to demonize others. He taught us to reclaim our projections, to ask not, who is dangerous, but where am I unconscious? Because the moment you see clearly is the moment the shadow loses control. But seeing the truth isn't enough. What matters now is, what do you do with it? Recognizing these psychological patterns in others and in yourself is like turning on a light in a dark room. At first, it hurts. You see more than you wanted to. You realize how many of your relationships were built not on love, but on projection, fear, or control. But in that discomfort lies power. The power to choose again, to protect your energy, to become conscious in a world that thrives on unconsciousness. The first step is developing what Jung called inner observation. You stop reacting to people's behavior and start listening to the emotional resonance behind it. Instead of asking, why are they doing this to me? You ask, what pattern is playing out here? This shift alone can save years of emotional suffering, because the moment you name the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. When someone manipulates you with guilt, you recognize it as a defense mechanism, not a verdict on your worth. When someone projects their inner chaos onto you, you learn not to carry what was never yours. When someone tries to dominate you with morality, you hear fear, not truth. And when someone plays the victim endless, you stop becoming their savior and start becoming your own. But even deeper than recognition is the art of protection. And this protection, Jung insisted, is not about building walls. It's about becoming whole. Because the more fragmented we are internally, the more vulnerable we are to others' unconscious behavior. The more we reject our own shadow, the easier it is for someone else's shadow to seduce us. Protection begins with integration. When you acknowledge your own manipulative impulses, they lose their grip. When you admit to projecting your insecurities, you reclaim them. When you confront your own inner chaos, you stop needing to be rescued or rescued by others. This is how you become dangerous in the best way. Not because you harm others, but because you're no longer easily controlled. Jung didn't want us to become paranoid. He wanted us to become precise, to walk through life with both compassion and clarity, to forgive others without allowing their poison to spread, and most importantly, to stay awake, even when it's easier to go back to sleep. Sometimes the most radical act is walking away, saying no, holding your boundary, not with anger, but with stillness. Because once you recognize that someone is unwilling or unable to face their own unconscious mind, you stop trying to fix them. You grieve who they could have been, and you return to yourself. And yet, you remain open, because not everyone who shows these traits is beyond saving. Sometimes, awareness is contagious. Sometimes, when one person wakes up, others begin to stir. This, too, is the quiet miracle of shadow work. You don't need to fight people. You just need to stop feeding their illusion. And sometimes, that alone changes everything. So protect yourself, not by becoming harder, but by becoming deeper. Recognize the games without needing to play them. Spot the patterns without losing your empathy. And remember, your own shadow will always be with you. But when you walk beside it, instead of running from it, you are no longer a danger to others, and no one else is a danger to you. Now you've seen them. The 6 faces Jung warned us about. Not monsters, but reflections. Reflections of the unconscious, of trauma left untreated, of pain wearing a mask. And maybe, along the way, you recognized them not only in others, but in yourself. If so, good. That's the beginning of real freedom. Carl Jung didn't ask us to judge these people. He asked us to understand them. Because in understanding, we stop being victims of their pattern. We stop repeating those patterns ourselves. We become witnesses, and then we become authors of a different story. The unconscious runs the show until we make it conscious. That's the heart of Jung's philosophy, and that's the invitation to become more awake, more honest, more whole. Because the world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It needs people courageous enough to see their own darkness and choose not to act from it. Yes, there are dangerous people, but the real danger is remaining asleep. The real danger is letting fear and shame guide your relationships. The real danger is thinking that these shadows are only out there, when in truth, they live inside all of us, waiting to be acknowledged. So what do you do now? You observe, you reflect, you protect your energy and your soul. You stop trying to fix those who refuse to heal. You surround yourself with people who walk the path of self-awareness. And above all, you turn inward. Because the more light you bring to your own unconscious, the less power anyone else's darkness will have over you. That's how we change. Not through force, but through presence. Not by escaping the shadow, but by integrating it. So take this moment, let it settle, let it open something. And if this message spoke to a part of you that needed to hear it, then share it. With someone lost in a toxic cycle, with someone waking up to their own patterns, with someone ready to see more clearly. Because the more of us who awaken, the fewer dangerous people this world will need to endure.